All right, good afternoon, everyone. And I think we are at time to get started. So welcome and thank you so much for coming today. If you are having any issues with your technology, please just let us know by typing into the chat if you can, and we'll be monitoring that in case you are having any, again, any issues seeing the presentation or with the voices. So just make sure you can tell us through the chat feature. So good afternoon, I'm Bonnie McDonald, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president of Landmarks Illinois. And I'm very pleased to give you this warm welcome to our very first virtual preservation snapshots lecture. Some of you know, if you've come to the in-person lectures, that we tend to have these usually in the spring and in the fall, with some occasions in between. But of course, this year it's a little bit different. So we're happy to be able to bring you today's very interesting presentation virtually. This is one in a series, just to let you know, of virtual lectures that we're planning and going to offer throughout the year into next spring. So we hope that you'll keep an eye out for what we are doing on our website at landmarks.org. We are going to have a range of very relevant and interesting and provocative lectures coming up. So we hope that you like them, even virtually, and again, that you'll participate with us by watching our website, social media, as well as our newsletter. Now, for those of you who this is your first time attending one of our Snapshots lectures and you don't know Landmarks Illinois, I'm happy to introduce you. We are the statewide historic preservation nonprofit advocacy and education organization for historic preservation. And we're about to turn 50 years old next year. So we've been doing this work all across the state for quite some time. Our mission is essentially to empower people saving places in their community for people. And we do that through a range of services, technical assistance, bringing our knowledge, know-how, grants, a loan program, basically any tool that we can think of to help people save places in their community. And if you are not currently a supporter of Landmarks Illinois, I certainly invite you to do so. You can become a member very easily at our website. There's a button at the very top right that you'll find where you can become a member. Or, if you want to make a one-time donation, if you really like the program today and the work that this represents, I hope that you'll go to the website and click the donate button to help us continue this vital work. Just wanted to tell you about another program in this series of virtual events. We want to get this on your calendar if possible, and that is our 2020 Richard H. Driehaus Foundation Preservation Awards. This is an annual program that we've had for over 26 years, where we basically bring you the model projects and people who are doing this great work of saving places all across the state. And we're very excited to bring you a virtual ceremony on October 21st, which is a Wednesday. So if, excuse me, I just want to say that we've all had a lot of Zoom calls probably, and I just want to say this isn't going to be your average Zoom call. We've really worked to ensure that we have a very professionally produced program. We have exciting videos that we're going to show you, as well as a live presentation. So just want to say that it's going to be unique, and we really would love to have you join us that day. You can register on our website, and we'll send you the Zoom link. Again, it's Wednesday, October 21st from 6 to 7 o'clock p.m. Our next Snapshots lecture, just again to get that on your calendar, is also going to be exciting. And as I mentioned, talking about some very relevant and provocative conversations in preservation. I'm sure that many of you have heard about the effort, if you're in Chicago or around Chicago, from the City Historic Preservation Division to create a new local landmark district in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. That community is historically a Latinx and specifically a Mexican-American community on Chicago's west side. The district has met with controversy, though, surrounding if it is the best tool to preserve the cultural heritage of the community, its businesses, helping people stay in their homes, as well as the unique built environment that's been created by the Mexican-American community. There have been questions around resident and business displacement as well. And it's been debated if there's a better tool, if this is the right tool, or if there's a better tool to help do that. So there's unfortunately a current effort to kill the districts. You know, we've certainly debated this within our own organization, and I think it's a real interesting effort to learn more about saving cultural heritage while also supporting people staying in place. So on Tuesday, November 10th, we've invited members of the preservation community from San Antonio, Texas, to come and speak about very similar experiences in preserving cultural heritage, housing, businesses, and places in the city where that city has a majority of residents that are Latinx, about 64%. So our speakers that day are going to be Sarah Zeneda Gould, who is the interim executive director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute, which is a national project to collect and disseminate Mexican American civil rights history. She's also the president of the board of Latinos and Cultural Heritage, or Heritage Conservation, excuse me, which is a national nonprofit coalition of Latinx preservationists. She is going to speak about the work of Latinos in heritage conservation, if you've never heard of it before, as well as San Antonio's West Side Preservation Alliance, and the work that they're doing at the national as well as the local level to increase Latino representation in historic preservation and increase understanding of heritage conservation as a social justice imperative. Now, additionally, she's going to address some policy changes that she would like to see to ensure inclusion and equity and improve engagement with underrepresented communities in preservation. So it's going to be very relevant and timely topic, thinking about Pilsen. We're also going to have her joined by Shannon Shea Miller, who is the Director of Historic Preservation Officer at the Office of Historic Preservation at the City of San Antonio. Shannon has really implemented an impressive array of tools to elevate cultural heritage as a criteria for local designation, as well as a living heritage symposium that she's helped to create, and bringing preservation into the city's climate action plan. So we think it's going to be a very interesting discussion to compare with what Chicago is doing. So you can look for more information about that again on our website at landmarks.org, and the date again is Tuesday, November 10th. Now let's get to today's lecture. Now this summer, Landmarks Illinois started an exciting new initiative called Women Who Built Illinois, and it's a database of places in the state created by women. The idea for the database came about when Lisa DiChiera, our Director of Advocacy, who you're going to hear from today, realized that there were no local landmarks in Chicago that were built by women. Now this, in addition to the fact that many of us know that only 8% of the National Register sites and 3% of National Historic Landmarks are representing people of color, women, or members of the LGBTQ community. So this all ignores the significant contribution that women have made to shaping our built environment, not only in Illinois, but around the country. So Lisa partnered with many organizations, including AIA Illinois, Women in Restoration and Engineering, known as WIRE, the Chicago Women in Architecture Foundation, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and Landmarks Illinois Skyline Council, as well as many others, to compile the first list of its kind, the first database. So this is going to compile data on women architects, engineers, developers, designers, and builders in Illinois between 1879 and 1979, and their built projects throughout the state of Illinois. So I'm proud to introduce our speakers so you can hear all about this effort. Lisa DiChiera has been our Director of Advocacy at Landmarks Illinois for a cumulative 21 years at this point, and she does an amazing job. We're so proud to have her on our team. Previously, she held positions with many, including Heinz Interests and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Lisa has a bachelor's in art and art history from UCLA, and then she has her preservation master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. Erica Ruggiero is a member of Landmarks Illinois Skyline Council, which is our emerging professionals committee, and she's a principal at the women-owned architecture firm McGuire, Igleski and Associates. Erica received her bachelor's and master's of science in interior design with a graduate certificate in urban design from Florida State University. And she also has a master's of science in historic preservation from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So again, I'm so proud to introduce both Lisa and Erica. Lisa is going to start us off. And again, thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Bonnie, for the introduction. And I just want to make one clarification for our viewers, and that is that we don't actually have a chat room enabled with this webinar. It is the Q&A function. So if you put your cursor at the bottom of the screen, you should be able to see a Q&A symbol, and that is where you can enter questions. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Many thanks to, as Bonnie noted, many people who I know are on this webinar who represent many of the organizations she mentioned. We're excited to give you a snapshot of Landmarks Illinois' initiative, Women Who Built Illinois, which is focused on identifying, documenting, and ultimately preserving the built places in our state, designed, engineered, developed, and commissioned by women from 1879 to 1979. To give you some background on how this effort got started, you may be familiar with Landmarks Illinois' annual Most Endangered Historic Places in Illinois list. It was in 2017 that we included on that list the Rotunda building at O'Hare Airport. This was due to ongoing gate and terminal expansion plans for the airport and the uncertainty of the Rotunda's future. The innovative 1962 round building built between O'Hare's first terminals has remained largely intact. It was designed by Gertrude Lemp Kurbis, who at the time was with the powerhouse firm C.F. Murphy and Associates, which was responsible for O'Hare's overall design and planning. As lead architect for the Rotunda, Kurbis distinguished it by its round shape and the use of a cable and concrete roof truss system. But even more remarkable is that Kurbis was given the lead design role, as she was one of few women working in the field, which, as we know, was male-dominated. The Rotunda's interior has a balcony that wraps around an open two-story atrium with a central crisscross staircase. Many may remember the building as having housed the famed Seven Continents restaurant, a fine dining establishment in the midst of a bustling airport from where diners could watch airplanes take off and land. Today, the interior is used mostly as a pass-through between terminals, but is intact, and the Illinois State Historic Preservation Office has determined the building as eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. Fortunately, as seen in a rendering by Studio Gang for the new global terminal, the building is included in current plans, but details are yet to be seen, and we will continue to advocate for this important building as it needs to be protected, preferably as a designated Chicago landmark. In making that case, we started to explore Kurbis's other built works, including the Skokie Public Library, which she designed while at Skidmore, Owings in Merrill, and it was built in 1960, and the Greenhouse Condominiums at 2131 North Clark Street, built in 1976, in which her role was both architect and developer. In talking to Gertrude's daughter, Kim, her mother at this point in her career, now with her own firm, Lemp Kurbis, was just making ends meet between teaching at Harper Community College and finding clients. So in this case, becoming developer was more of a necessity. As Gertrude stated in her 2007 oral history interview for the Department of Architecture and Design at the Art Institute of Chicago, quote, "If the client doesn't come to you, you have to go make your own client," unquote. At the greenhouse, with a loan from architect Ted Bennett and others, she bought the land, designed the project, worked as construction manager, and built this AIA award-winning project. In addition to Kurbis's built legacy, we began to research the work of other female architects in Chicago and the region who we believe have never been adequately recognized, some of whom Erica will feature. But soon we realized, like Curbis's work, also as a developer, this was not just about the need to recognize female architects, but also engineers, landscape architects, interior designers, developers, and clients who have not been adequately recognized for their impact on the built legacy of Illinois. Now we realize we are not the only ones doing this work. Chicago Women in Architecture, an organization co-founded by Curbis, highlights the work of women architects in Chicago. Not long ago, our colleagues at the Chicago Bungalow Association discovered and highlighted the work of Mary Willis, who even earlier than Curbis designed and developed her own buildings. In this case, bungalows on the Northwest Side in the 19-teens. Architectural historian Julia Bacharach has been featuring under-recognized women in lectures and on her blog, such as the work of Bertha Yerrick's Whitman, who designed many single-family homes in Evanston. In a newly released book called Modern in the Middle by architectural historian Susan Benjamin and IIT professor Michelangelo Sabatino, a 1960 Lamont home designed by architect Gene Wareheim is featured. And the National Trust for Historic Preservation is bringing new attention to one of Mies van der Rohe's most important clients, Edith Farnsworth, featuring her original furnishings at the Farnsworth House and offering new programming about her life. In researching women who designed and built places, we came to realize too that in Chicago, our great city of architecture, there is not one building designed or developed by a woman that is a designated Chicago landmark and therefore protected. And as you can see, we have a lot of designated landmarks in this city, thanks to the fantastic work of our Department of Planning and Development and the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. So we have set out to change this. And in 2018, with the help of our young professionals group, the Skyline Council, of which Erica is a member, we made this research an official project and decided to expand our focus to include not only the work of women in Chicago, but in the entire state from 1879 to 1979. And as we find these built places in Illinois, we will be ultimately evaluating their condition and their eligibility for designation, either as local landmarks, depending on their location, or for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. So while we've been quietly working on this effort for over 2 years, we thought it fitting to officially launch Women Who Built Illinois this year, as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. And it is our plan by year end to have this database officially housed on our website, www.landmarks.org, for the public to access and contribute to as we know more women's stories and places in the state will be found. I want to thank our 2 summer interns, recent high school graduate Jared Safe and recent college graduate Craig Kennedy, for their photo documentation and research this past summer. And to those who have reached out to us about this effort, making suggestions of women and offering assistance. We have several funders to acknowledge at the end of this presentation, and I especially want to thank Erica for her research and partnership in helping me develop this initiative. So with that, Erica will highlight some of the women we will soon be featuring in our online database.
Thank you, Lisa, for that introduction to the project. As Lisa mentioned, next I'll cover, unfortunately, only just a few of the 85+ groundbreaking women who were pioneers in the field of architecture, engineering, design, landscape architecture, and real estate at the beginning of the 20th century across the state of Illinois. Beginning with Elizabeth Martini, the first woman to be a sole owner of an architecture firm in Chicago. Elizabeth was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1886 and grew up in Massachusetts. She studied at the Pratt Institute and Columbia University before moving with her family to Illinois in 1909. In her first year, she was rejected by 90 architectural firms due to her gender until finding a position as a secretary. In 1913, she received her architectural license from the state of Illinois, being only the second woman ever licensed in the state, and the following year opened her practice. Elizabeth practiced under her initials E.A. Martini, assuming that she would receive more inquiries if she did not use her name Elizabeth, even being referred to as a he in the Tribune. Elizabeth continued her practice in Chicago until 1934, at which time she moved to Bangor, Michigan. While in Chicago, Martini ran a newspaper advertisement in a hope to meet other women in the field. It read, "Only girl architect lonely, to meet all the women architects in Chicago to form a club." And in 1921, she founded the Chicago Drafting Club, one of the first organizations for women architects and a precursor of the Women's Architectural Club founded in 1927. Many of Martini's works were for single-family residences across the Chicagoland area. She was one of 3 winners of a 1917 farmhouse design competition sponsored by the Illinois Board of Agriculture and the Illinois chapter of the AIA, and regularly contributed articles to Better Homes and Gardens magazine. In addition to her residential designs, Martini was responsible for the design of a few factories and warehouses, like the A. Alexander Bauer Construction Co. at 230 West Superior, as well as religious works, including her most prominent design for the St. Luke's Lutheran Congregation and Park Ridge for their sanctuary and education wing, and where she was a member and taught children in the Sunday school. Regarded as the first documented African-American woman architect to be licensed in the United States, Beverly Lorraine Green received her architectural license in the state of Illinois in 1942. Green was born in Chicago in 1915. She attended the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and received a degree in architectural engineering in 1936. She was also the first African-American woman to earn this degree from the university. A year later, she earned a master in city planning and housing. After graduation, she went to work for the Chicago Housing Authority in 1938, where she was one of the first African Americans hired by the agency and where she stayed until 1945, at which time she moved to New York to work on a housing development by the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. After a few days, she quit and chose to pursue a master's in architecture at Columbia University. While at Columbia, she took a job with the architectural firm of Isidore Rosefield, designing health facilities until 1955. Very little is known about Green's time at the Chicago Housing Authority and her work in Illinois. We've actually tried to FOIA records from Chicago Housing Authority, and unfortunately their records don't go back that far. So if you have any information, we'll discuss it later, but we're looking for more information on Green's works. We have been able to narrow down the possible projects that she worked on while at CHA, which may include the Ida B. Wells homes, Lathrop homes, Altkill Gardens, and the Cabrini Green homes. Her career after Illinois is documented, and we know she went on to collaborate independently with prominent architects to design works including the UNESCO headquarters in Paris with Marcel Breuer, Sarah Lawrence College Arts Complex, and a theater at the University of Arkansas with architect Edward Durrell Stone, as well as multiple buildings on the University Heights campus of New York University. Next, we have Julia Alice Peddle. Currently, we know very little about Peddle. While her career in Indiana is well documented, her work and time in Illinois is not. Born in 1899 in Terre Haute, Indiana, Peddle learned how to draft at an early age from her father, who taught machine design. She graduated from the University of Michigan in 1922 and was also one of the co-founders of the Women's Architectural Club. After graduation, she moved to Chicago, where she worked for a number of architectural firms, including Perkins Fellows in Hamilton and the office of Edwin Hill Clark. During the Great Depression, she worked as a draftsperson with the Historic American Building Survey on many of the same buildings as Mary Ann Elizabeth Crawford, which I'll mention a little bit later. She moved back to Terre Haute in 1935, where she opened her own architectural firm and practiced for the next 30 years. Her only two known works in Illinois are the George Mitchell residence and Paul Martin residence, located in the Oak Crest subdivision in Marshall, Illinois, and constructed in 1958 and 1959, respectively. And unfortunately, Google Street View has not gotten to the residential streets of Marshall yet, but we were able to find these elevation drawings completed by Petal and housed in her archives at Ball State University. Petal was also known for her drawings and holiday cards, a few of which are featured in the bottom left. Next, born in Shanghai, China, Po Hu Shao began her architectural studies and career in her home country, first studying at the National Central University in Taiwan and receiving her bachelor's in architecture in 1941, and then going on to teach at the university from 1941 to 1946. Shao moved to the United States in 1949 after being awarded the Barber Scholarship for Oriental Women by the University of Michigan, a scholarship awarded to outstanding women with the intent that they would study at the University of Michigan and then return to their home countries with the knowledge and skills they obtained to better the lives of those who live there. Shao never returned home, though, and formally immigrated to the United States in 1952 after graduating and working in the architectural firm of William Edward Capp in Detroit between 1949 and 1952. Shao moved to Chicago by 1958 and joined the firm of Lobel, Schlossman, and Bennett, where she remained for a majority of her career, designing buildings across the Midwest. In Illinois, her significant works focused on private residential, like the Saul Sherman residence in Winnetka, educational projects including Mather High School and Deerfield High School, for which she won an award from the American Association of School Administrators in 1961, recreational buildings like the Harriet M. Harris Park District building in Chicago, as well as healthcare facilities and offices. Outside of Illinois, she had educational commissions from Beloit College in Wisconsin and private residential, including the Winton Place apartment building in Lakewood, Ohio. Next is Mary Ann Elizabeth Crawford. She practiced architecture and engineering for nearly 60 years, and it was really only until the last decade of her life that she received considerable attention for her designs and drawings. A native of Illinois, Mary was born in 1901 and grew up in Girard. At the age of 5, her father realized her talent and purchased her art supplies and enrolled her in art classes. 6 years later, at the age of 11, she helped design the family home in Montgomery County, translating her and her family's design ideas to the architect in Chicago. She began her studies at the University of Illinois in 1919, but later dropped out due to family emergency. She later transferred to MIT, graduating in 1929 and receiving her master's in 1930. During the Great Depression, Mary was a stenographer for the architectural firm of Holabird and Root, proofread road maps for Rand McNally, and was a draft person for the Historic American Building Survey until 1943. Something that actually really resonates with me today because I not only get to work on HAB's documentation projects, but I've actually used some of Mary's drawings for properties that my firm has had the opportunity to work on restoring. In the 1930s, she also served as chair of the Women's Architectural Club and later as an officer for the Society of Western Engineers. In 1941, Mary received her architectural license and began working independently on industrial, commercial, and residential commissions. 2 years later, she became a professional engineer. Her most prominent work is the headquarters and manufacturing facility for the Lindbergh Engineering Company in Chicago. Additionally, she worked on a number of interior remodelings for private residences and offices, and worked on the remodeling of private suites and the Green Room restaurant at the Bismarck Hotel, now the Kimpton Hotel Allegro on Randolph Street in Chicago. Pictured here again is Lindbergh Engineering Company, but with a wonderful photo of Mary Ann standing in front of the front door of the building. If you commute on Metra's Milwaukee District or the North Central lines, or have even taken Amtrak's Empire Builder or Hiawatha lines, You might be familiar with the building as it's located directly across the street from the Western Avenue station. Our next engineer is Georgia Louise Harris Brown, considered to be the second African-American woman to become a licensed architect in the United States. Brown was born in Topeka, Kansas in 1918. From an early age, she showed an artistic and mechanical aptitude while working on cars and farm equipment with her older brothers. In 1938, she went to visit her brother in Chicago and attended a summer course at IIT taught by Mies van der Rohe. Between 1940 and 1944, she attended the University of Kansas to receive a degree in architecture, becoming the first African-American woman to earn the degree in the history of the university. Brown returned to Chicago in 1945 and began working at the architectural firm of Kenneth Roderick O'Neill, where she stayed until 1949. That year, she received her architectural license and then took a job with Frank Cornacker and Associates. Brown learned to speak Portuguese by studying with a friend and permanently moved to Brazil by 1954, not returning stateside until 1995. One of her reasons for leaving the United States was because, and quote, opportunities for advancement were limited by her race. And in Brazil, there would be fewer racial boundaries for her to succeed. While working in Chicago, Brown was responsible for the structural calculations on a number of prominent buildings constructed in the 1940s and early 1950s, including the Promontory Apartments and 860-880 Lakeshore Drive, both designed by Mies van der Rohe, as well as the Prairie Court Apartments by Keck and Keck. And before the architect, the engineer, or the designer, there is the developer. As part of this project, we have been able to identify a number of pioneering women developers, including a few we will feature today, starting with Emma Kennett. An Illinois native, Kennett was born in February 1891. We don't have much information on Kennett's first 3 decades, but by the time she was 32, she was operating the Kennett Construction Company and building picturesque flat buildings in the Tudor and Spanish Revival styles across Chicago's far north side communities. Kennett designed all of her own buildings, assisted only by local architects, including Arthur C. Bucket and Herbert J. Richter, to ensure the technical details were correct. As for a contractor, Kennett partnered with one of the first African-American contractors in the city, Joseph Frederick Rousseau. Together, they did nearly $5 million in business over roughly 5 years, only splitting ways due to the Great Depression and a lull in development activity. Kennett was accomplished and successful despite a difficult and at times devastating personal life. At the beginning of the 1930s, her husband experienced a nervous breakdown, entered a sanitarium in California, which was all financially supported by Emma. He ultimately left the sanitarium and not long after was murdered after an encounter with, based on reading newspaper articles, what appears to be a serial killer in California. The following decade, she then lost her son, Captain James C. Kennett, in a battle in North Italy during World War II. And despite all of this, Kennett persisted and is known to have constructed over 80 multi-unit homes in the Jarvis Ridge Howard area of Rogers Park, as well as some in Evanston. She would go on to establish the Kennett Realty Company during the mid-20th century, building and selling model homes in the North Shore suburb of Lake Forest. By 1960, she decided to move out to Santa Barbara, California, where she became the proprietor of the historic El Encanto Hotel between 1961 and 1975, at which time it appears she finally retired at the age of 84 years old. And I just have to say good for her, because that is a very extensive working career. While not considered designer, architect, or engineer, we have chosen to include those women who have had a profound impact on the built environment, regardless of their professional title. One such woman is Elizabeth Wood, the first executive director for the Chicago Housing Authority. Born in Japan to missionary parents and grew up in Bloomington, Illinois, Elizabeth Wood studied at Illinois Wesleyan University and at the University of Michigan, where she received a bachelor's and master's degree in rhetoric, respectively. And for those of you who don't know, like I didn't before studying, Elizabeth would, studies in rhetoric instructed students in effective written and oral communication. This degree was typically a precursor to a career in law, teaching, or public administration. Following graduation, Elizabeth taught English between 1928 and 1932 before moving to Chicago, where she briefly worked for the Home Modernizing Bureau, a trade organization. When the trade organization collapsed during the Great Depression, Elizabeth's next move was to become a housing advocate and planner. She first worked as a caseworker while studying at the University of Chicago's School of Social Service Administration. By 1934, she was the executive director of the Metropolitan Housing Council, and a year later became the executive director of the Illinois State Housing Board. In 1937, Wood became the first executive director for the Chicago Housing Authority and would remain in that position for the next 17 years. As executive director, Elizabeth pushed an agenda to provide high quality, low to mid-rise, racially integrated housing of architectural excellence, which would be equally distributed throughout the city. She worked closely with the Chicago Park District to assure tenants had adequate recreation space and advocated for the construction of community and cultural facilities as part of the housing development. Those developments, regarded as her greatest accomplishments while at CHA, include the Jane Addams, Julia C. Lathrop, and Trumbull Park homes. Looking deeper at the development of a dozen other housing projects during Elizabeth's tenure, it's clear she had a hand in so many more projects, including the Ida B. Wells homes, Cabrini Green homes, and Alt Hill Gardens. Wood was ultimately fired from CHA in 1954 due to her drive to integrate and maintain racial balance within housing developments, as well as ensure equal distribution of public housing throughout the city. And at the time, the city council wanted none of that. So Wood would go on to work for the Chicago Housing Authority and the Citizens Housing and Planning Council in New York City. And from 1965 to 1972, she served as an advisor at the Department of Housing and Urban Development under the Johnson and Nixon administrations. Our next woman and last developer is Mary E. Willis. Much of what we know about Willis comes to us from the Chicago Bungalow Association, courtesy of the research and survey work completed by Carla Bruni and Ellen Collig. Born Mary Post in Wisconsin in 1862, she married Philip C. Willis in 1888 and had one child, a daughter named Frances. By 1910, Mary and her family are living on Chicago's north side and were renting an apartment with 6 other lodgers. Philip was an entrepreneur who started his own pest management business, and I kind of have to question if this has something to do with his untimely death. I can't really imagine what pest management control looked like in 1910, but it appears based on research it was quite untimely. Nevertheless, it was shortly after Philip's passing that Mary realized her own entrepreneurial drive. At this time, it was still unusual for a woman to be working, and on top of that, to be working outside of the home or not working as clerical staff. The 1920 census documents Mary's success, and by this time she's listed as a real estate agent and living in her own home and no longer in a small flat with her family, plus 6 other boarders. Based on the research completed by Carla and Ellen, Mary built more than 60 homes and buildings. The majority of them are in Portage Park, on the 4600 and 4700 blocks of North Laramie, the 4600 block of North LeClaire, the 5000 and 5100 block of West Wilson, the 5000 and 5100 blocks of West Windsor, and the 4600 block of North Lawler. All were constructed between 1913 and 1921. The majority of her homes were Chicago bungalows, and like many developers of the time, Mary would buy up a row of lots along a street and develop them simultaneously for efficiency and hired local architects, including Ernest Brocher, Walter Heimbeck, and Charles Wheeler to complete the designs. By 1930, Mary's retired and living with her daughter Frances and her husband Elmer. After the developers, designers, and architects and engineers, we cannot forget the landscape architects. Starting with pioneer landscape architect and designer Gertrude Eisendrath de Mel Koo. Born in 1893 in Racine, Wisconsin, Gertrude moved to Chicago with her family at the age of 6. As a young adult, she began her college education at Sweetbriar College in Virginia in 1912, but transferred to the Lothrop School of Landscape Architecture in Massachusetts, from which she graduated in 1917. While in school, Koo apprenticed with landscape architect Ellen Biddle Shipman, before then being hired at the office of Francis Robinson in Des Moines, Iowa. She returned to Chicago in 1921 and started her own practice. Her first designs were for private gardens in Pennsylvania, where she had family connections. Over the next 50 years, Koo designed over 400 landscape projects and gardens, many of these with her associate Mary Long Rogers. Koo's works focus on both plantings for new construction and redesigns of existing landscape. Something that we're familiar with today that Koo initially faced when she started her career was the subdivision of many large estates throughout Chicago's north suburbs, being subdivided into multi-acre estates into smaller lots. In the 1930s, she designed several gardens for shoe manufacturer Irving Florsheim's estate in Libertyville, Illinois. She was so well established by 1940 that she was often hired before the project architect, with the understanding that she would assist in choosing the architect. By 1950, Koo was working with Mary Long Rogers, designing over 200 landscapes throughout their 25-plus-year collaboration. Although most of her work was residential, Koo completed commissions for several hospitals and religious institutions, including the Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago. Lastly, we have Mary Long Rogers. We know very little about Rogers at this time, both about her professional career and even less about her personal life. Rogers' career appears to have begun with her and her husband establishing the firm of Rogers and Rogers, where they consulted to a number of architectural firms and planning boards during the 1930s and 1940s. By the 1950s, Rogers became an associate to Koo, a collaboration that would continue for nearly 3 decades. In addition to the selection of over 200 landscapes designed by Koo and Rogers, Rogers' earlier work appears to have had a focus on urban planning, including a redevelopment plan for Chicago's Near West Side community, the official plan for Taylorville, Illinois, which can be equated to a comprehensive plan today, and a preliminary survey of the Calumet Industrial District. Something also that resonates with me, for those of you who know me, I've spent many years studying the Central Manufacturing District, and their last tract of industrial land was actually the Calumet District. So I've also been able to unknowingly study Rogers' survey of the area, and it just shows how small this field really is. The information shared today only just begins to scrape the surface of these women's lives and careers. Like with Mary Long Rogers, we are constantly looking for additional information, especially on some of the more elusive women that we have documented, including Beverly Lorraine Green, as I previously mentioned, and Juliet Petal, as well as later 20th century women such as Barbara Armstrong, Martha Weinberg, or Angela Czar. If you have any additional information on the women mentioned today or have a woman you want to make sure will be included in the database, I encourage you to please reach out to Lisa or myself and follow Landmarks Illinois for updates on the launch of the database. With that, thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa DiChiera.
Thanks, Erica. And before we take any questions, I just want to note those organizations that have generously contributed to this effort. We're so appreciative of their support. So AIA Illinois, Women in Restoration and Engineering, and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Their funding of this project is going to help us build this database on our website that will be publicly accessible for everyone. And we're going to be getting that launched this fall. And the hope is that by year end, that will be something that anyone can come and use as a research tool. We will try to make it as interactive as possible. One question that we've had is, will there be a mapping component to this website? That is something we're going to look into as well. And we're hoping to have it also be very visual. Lots of pictures of these places that we are unearthing, as well as that are being submitted to us by many others. And we also will be including many links, and those links will be providing information on most of these women in terms of where their archives are and other people's written articles and information about them as well. So we really look forward to providing this resource at the end of the year, and to hear from you. And hopefully we will hear from you about these women that we've featured already, if you know anything more about them. But especially throughout the state, we really want to know about women who are active in communities that are not just Chicagoland region, but in our smaller communities and our mid-sized cities. We're looking to you to provide that information to us. So with that, I do want to answer a few questions here that are coming in through our Q&A. One is asking, any particular reason Marion Griffin not included here? Also, the owner of the drawings in one of the slides was Carla Bruni. Could that be the Carla Bruni? Yes, there's one and only one Carla Bruni, not the one who was the First Lady of France. That is a Carla Bruni who is here active in Illinois. She's our one and only Carla Bruni. She's a wonderful historian and preservationist, and has been very active in doing survey work of areas throughout the city of Chicago for the Chicago Bungalow Association for several bungalow National Register districts. The reason we don't have Marion Griffin highlighted today is because a lot of people do know her. Marion Mahoney Griffin is probably one of the few women that is a name that many people recognize. And so today we wanted to really highlight those that we're more confident are names that you probably have not heard before. But we will be having her, of course, in the database that will eventually be on our website. Judith McBrien asks, can you tell us a little more about the database? What format are you using? And will there be a file for film and video? Thanks for asking that question, Judith. Judith McBrien is a former board member of Landmarks Illinois, former chair, also a wonderful historian and documentary filmmaker, knows all things Burnham, and has also done a lot of research on women architects over the years. So Judith, our database will be, like I said, from our perspective, hopefully very comprehensive, with links to visuals and to other database archive sites. And from my perspective, we can link to film and video as well. So yes, we're happy to talk to you about that further if you have something that you think you'd like to provide to us. We'd really appreciate that. And the database itself, again, we hope to be very user-friendly in that and right now, like was mentioned earlier, we have over 85 women so far in this database, and we expect it obviously to grow. So it will be something that will be searchable by the woman's name. Most likely we'll try to also make it searchable by location of community, and possibly by name of building. So we'll have several different types of search mechanisms. If anyone has suggestions regarding that in terms of other databases that they have used or seen before that they have found successful, please let us know that, and we'll share it with our web designer. And with that, Bonnie, did you have something that you wanted to also add?
I do. Thank you, Lisa. And I think it's a question for both of you. Maybe on behalf of those who aren't quite sure how to find information about these women, they may want to help with some of the research. I would say that, Erica, I love that you shared your personal experiences. Thank you. That, that just illuminates more about your research. In doing research about my own home, I found that it was part of a group of 3 houses built together by a woman developer. And, we can't see that from the outside. You really have to do the research. So if you have some people who are just beginning to do this kind of research, can you give them some guidelines?
Sure. So I guess getting started, it was terribly difficult to find these names, but luckily, I believe in 1987 or 1988, AIA had actually compiled a list of women architects that were AIA members before 1988. So we were able to start there with a list of names, but then it really comes down to utilizing your Chicago Public Library card and the amazing databases that come with it, like the Chicago Tribune archives and the Illinois newspaper collection, and searching for the initials or the names of these women in those newspaper archives when building permits were listed in newspapers. Also utilizing the Chicago History Museum and their databases. Some of these women's archives are at the Chicago History Museum, as well as they're listed in the American Contractor catalog, and again, being able to search by name. A lot of the digital building catalogs of the early 20th century are all searchable. And then also the International Archive of Women Architects, which is located at Virginia Tech. And then just also doing a Google search to find, the women, an individual woman's archive, possibly at the college that they studied at. So we didn't feature her today, but Bertha Urix-Whitman, we know her archive is at University of Michigan, where she studied. Obviously, Julia Alice Peddle is at Ball State University, since she did most of her career in Indiana. And so there's a lot of resources out there, and if you don't find something under a woman's full name, use their initials. Like I said, they may have not practiced under their full name, hoping to get more inquiries if they weren't recognized as a woman.
So I'm just going to pick up on where we left off with some of the questions that are coming in. Julia Bachrach, who I mentioned earlier in the presentation, who is a respected architectural historian here in Chicago and has done incredible work herself of unearthing women architects and developers through her own survey work, especially on the North Side, is asking if we will post the working list of women that we've accumulated so far. Yes, that's something we're happy to do, considering that the overall database will not be posted on our website until the end of the year. So I'll be talking to Caitlin McAvoy, our communications manager, about that. We'll find a place that maybe we can just have a running list so people can see who we already do have and who we don't have. And then also we've gotten a question or a suggestion already of a woman named Harriet Redlick, I believe it is, and that she was a licensed architect in 1950, active in Chicago, doing home renovations. She started working on granny houses after moving to California, a subject quite relevant to today's push for auxiliary dwelling units, and she interned with Richard Neutra and Minoru Yamasaki. It's interesting. One thing I will say is that we have been sort of fluctuating whether to include women in the database who may have had a Chicago residency for a time or an Illinois residency, whether they went to school here, but then didn't actually design or build anything here, went on to another location. So anyway, we'll continue to work on that as well. Allison Fisher, good to hear from you, Allison. I'm curious about the stories surrounding female clients for architecture. Do you think these findings might shift our appreciation of women's engagement with architectural questions over time? You know, it's interesting because obviously probably Edith Farnsworth is our most prominent female client here in Illinois with the iconic Farnsworth House. But it is interesting, and I want to do a shout out again to Susan Benjamin and Michelangelo Sabatino, because one thing that they have done in their new book, Modern in the Middle, is they are acknowledging the couples who commissioned these homes, these modern homes in Chicago and the Chicagoland area, by naming the women as well. You know, often in our architectural history books, you know, it's Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, and we don't know much about who the wife was, what her role was, or even what her first name was. So I really appreciate that they are equally giving acknowledgement to the wife and what that partner's view may have been on the commission and the design of the home. And again, Allison, I look to you as an expert in this field. If there's other women you think that we should be aware of from the client perspective, we'd really appreciate that. Two of the women that Erica highlighted as well from their work at CHA, in a way were clients as well in terms of the work that they did from a leadership position there. We have another woman, Beth Bowden. Very interesting to hear about the female developers. How do you think they funded their projects? Bank loans would have been impossible without a male co-signer, right? Well, yes, from what we understand, very difficult to get financing, traditional bank financing for women through most of the 20th century up until the end. Again, in my conversation with Kim Kurbis, Gertrude's daughter, getting financing was very much getting it from family and friends. And so Ted Bennett, who was a close family friend, well-known architect, was one of her financiers, but it was a loan, not a grant, and so she still had to pay him back, as well as other family members and friends who were willing to invest in her greenhouse project and another project she did at a later point in time in Lincoln Park as well. Sometimes, in the case of Gertrude as well, there were some funds available through the city of Chicago, through HUD funds and different kinds of programs that existed at the time. But traditional bank loans were very difficult. And back to what Erica said, again, sometimes women were not using their true names too. They were either using initials and company names with co-signers, absolutely. And that in itself would be a very interesting research project for someone to do. Patricia Joseph, good friend Patricia, glad you're with us. Will this presentation be publicly available so that others can see it? Yes, we've recorded this presentation. Not sure when we'll be able to get it posted on our website, but that will be a goal, so thank you for asking. Allison Fisher, correct. No more Mr. and Mrs. Ben Armstrong. That's right. Let's acknowledge those women by their first names and for the people they truly were. And Richard Friedman is acknowledging that he likes the display behind me. If anyone has not noticed, that is the Thompson Center. Just a little subliminal effect here behind me, hoping that that's working. So thanks, Richard, for noticing the set design. We worked very hard on that. We really appreciate all of you joining us today, and we're right at 4 o'clock, and we're really finding this fun as well as important work. We hope you're finding it fun, and again, really engaging. And you know, there's a lot of other people I wish we could acknowledge who we know are also studying women who have been known to have made major contributions in their communities, especially the suburbs. So again, we hope to continue to have you contribute to our effort, and we will continue to work with you and the places in your communities that women impacted. Thank you so much for joining us.